Thanks. My name's Tim. I'm an alcoholic. Um, Thank you for being here. And if anything I say is useful, then wonderful. And if it's not, don't worry about it. Um, so tradition 10, um, short form, Alcoholics Anonymous. Let me just change the shape of the screen just a sec. Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues, hence the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. Long form. No AA group or member should ever, in such a way as to implicate AA, express any opinion on outside controversial issues, particularly those of politics, alcohol reform, or sectarian religion. The Alcoholics Anonymous groups oppose no one. Concerning such matters, they can express no view whatsoever. And I've said this before, but I think it's useful to just say it every time in case there are people who weren't here for the other ones. Um, with the traditions, they start off talking about the group, and then they start to expand in some of the later traditions to talk about the fellowship as a whole. And I think in one of the introductions to the traditions in one of the pamphlets, it talks about the two basic areas being how to run a group and public relations. But as principles, they apply very, very broadly, I believe. I mean, some people disagree with me on this, and that's fine. But I think they apply very, very broadly. So I think this tradition applies to the fellowship as a whole, uh, individual groups, and members when representing AA or appearing to represent AA. It's one of the important principles that runs through the traditions is that the perception is as important as the fact. So in tradition 6, I think it says, don't affiliate with your local, supermarket or treatment center or fire brigade, and don't appear to do that either. The perception is just as important as the fact. And so this means that within AA, I am really careful to not share views, if possible, on outside issues in my home group or at fellowship, or when talking to sponsees, especially when they're new. Um, once I become, once you become friends with them and they know when you've got the sponsor hat on and when you haven't, it's fine. But the way a friend of mine expresses this very well, the example he gives is uh, when someone says in a meeting, "I'm a recovering Catholic," and everyone laughs because it's, well, some people laugh anyway. The newcomer Catholic doesn't know that you standing at the podium or even sharing from the floor does not represent AA. As far as they're concerned, you represent AA. And you've now said that Catholics are a laughing stock within AA. Um, and the other one that you get very often is religion is for people who want to avoid hell, spirituality is for people who have been there. Well, that dismisses a lot of human experience in one go. Um, a friend of mine, and this isn't an abstract question, a friend of mine took a very devout Catholic newcomer to an AA meeting where the person doing the chair uh, made great play of the whole Catholic thing. And there lots of the sharing from the floor echoed it, and there were lots of disparaging comments about religion. And the Catholic newcomer said, "I don't feel I'm welcome here. I don't think this is the right place for me. I don't. I'm really identified with my Catholicism. If you don't respect Catholicism, you don't. Will I be respected here for my views?" It appears that Catholicism is fair game. They didn't go back. And I wouldn't have gone back if I were them. I wouldn't have gone back. So in the same way that one would frown, one would hope, on sharing which is overtly racist or sexist or homophobic or whatever, I think one must extend the same courtesy to political views and religious views and all sorts of other views. What is outside? Anything that's not inside, so anything that's not to do with the single primary purpose is an outside issue. With controversial stuff, I mean, sometimes I've been in meetings where, for whatever reason, the topic comes up of medication. Maybe that's been a topic all the way down there. And a friend of mine who had a major pill problem, and at 8 years relapsed first on Valium, and then on other benzos, and then cocaine, and finally at 10 years alcohol. He will talk about the dangers of prescribed medication. You know, the relapse started with prescribed medication. And so, you know, it's pretty uncontroversial to say, you know, probably not a good idea if you're new to go and buy crystal meth off your neighbor on the floor below. But obviously it is controversial to talk about prescribed medication. If he's going to say anything about it, he prefaces it by saying, I'm going to share my experience here. I have no view on what anyone else should do. I have no view on the medical profession. I have no view on the licensing, the marketing authorization of pharmaceutical products. AA has no view on these. This is just me talking. That's all. And then he says what he wants to say. So there are ways of saying things that need to be said without dragging AA into it. I'm careful. I've made mistakes, but I'm careful about not only when I'm sharing in a meeting, but at fellowship afterwards. So there are a couple of people at my old home group who, well, one of them in particular, he's no longer a member. He would find people after the meeting who he knew were interested in politics. And we'd go for, 30, 40, 50 of us would go for dinner. And he would find a few of his like special pals who thought would be interested in politics, and sit on one of the tables. He arranged for them to all sit together, and within 2 minutes, all you could hear it spread down the table. And it's, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? It's a fellowship. Is it to do with AA? I think it is if it's fellowship after a meeting. So I'm really careful. I don't talk about politics at fellowship after a meeting. There is plenty in the universe to talk other than that. Over here, there is a tendency in all parts of the political spectrum for people to assume that anyone that doesn't share their views is stupid or malicious or dishonest. And I've seen this creep into the discussion at fellowship after the meeting, and watch other people who share the minority view getting really uncomfortable and not coming back. Point of fellowship. It's the one time in the week when you can sit next to people you wouldn't otherwise sit next to. This is what I like about going for fellowship is it looks like the bar in Star Wars. It looks like an illustration from Dr. Seuss. These are people that normally would not mix, one of the major understatements in AA. So this is the one time, I can talk about politics or controversial stuff the other, 167 hours of the week, however many there are. But the 1 hour I'm at fellowship after the meeting, that's when I try and talk about stuff which relates to recovery, and almost everything relates to recovery one way or another. but I try to stick to uncontroversial stuff so that I remain available to anyone who wants help. I remain available. Um, and one thing that strikes me about AA at its best is you've got people who hold radically different views in terms of religion and politics who can help each other. A friend of mine is a major. I think she's a major. Is she a major or is she a brigadier? Something very senior in the army, anyway. And she's a medic. And she got sober in Northern Ireland. And when she went to meetings, she was a British, very English woman in a meeting with uh, Catholic Republicans and Protestant Unionists, all in a meeting together, and everyone was safe. And I think this is a good model. And the way they did that is they did not bring up politics. They didn't like sit on different sides of the room. There's another issue as well, and this is just a more general one. My primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety and to do and to practice these principles in all our affairs. There are two sides to it. The balance, the equilibrium, is a dynamic equilibrium and changes. But I bear in mind that, you know, that phrase, you might be the only big book that someone reads, that you might be the one connection to the world of recovery that someone has. And like, if you're a complete dick, you're not going to be approachable if someone needs help. And part of not being a dick, like at work, on social media, I used to be very outspoken on lots of things, and I'm just not anymore because this is not what anyone else should do. I've decided it gets in the way of me being maximally useful. And so I've got in the habit of not posting political things on Facebook because Facebook has been a place where not overtly political things. I mean, you could say that posting anything spiritual is a political act, and I think in some ways it is, but not posting overtly political things because it happens fairly regularly that people contact me for various reasons and ask for help on this, ask for help on that. Again, I want to be approachable. I don't want to be the person they can't go to because I said something unnecessary and unpleasant about the other side, whoever the other side is. There's in the St. Augustine prayer book, which is a very good volume. There is a section on the sacraments of penance, which is basically their step 4. Huge list of character defects. You run down the list, you tick them off, you give an example of each, you find your vicar, you say, do you have 20 minutes? And you read them out. That's apparently what you're supposed to do. And one of the defects is unnecessary criticism, even when true. And so when it comes to politics, as my friend Tom says, being right doesn't always help. Why am I saying this? What am I seeking to achieve? So I discover myself being quiet generally on these things because in my case, that's not I don't think it's my role in life. I've got sponsees who are politicians. I've got sponsees who are like internationally known activists in various areas, you know, millions of people following them on Twitter and whatever. They have a role. They play that role very well. It's not my role. So I've got to know what my role is. So is it outside? And that kind of stuff for me is outside, partly because I'm not very well. I've been sober since 24th July 1993, and I'm a little touchy still. I tend to be a little bit reactive. I know you're all sitting there very placidly, but I react to shit. I really do. And it doesn't take much. Sometimes if I have a bad day, it doesn't take much. It's so embarrassing. God gets rid of the defects which get in the way of me doing God's will. He doesn't get rid of the ones which are just embarrassing and being touchy and reactive. I seem to be able to do useful things in the world whilst remaining embarrassingly neurotic and childish. So with stuff that matters in the world, um, the way I handle that, rather than expressing my view at every opportunity, or expressing my view even when there isn't an opportunity. um, Concept 8 talks about um, uh, delegation. There's direct delegation and there's very indirect delegation. So the board of trustees, they either oversee the work directly or they hire directors to oversee the work directly. And so with the things that I think matter in the world, I'm not going to list them. The things that I think matter in the world, rather than being personally involved in everything, I'm discharging my duty by giving, money on a regular basis to various think tanks and causes and blah, blah, blah. So it means I can do my bit without getting super tangled up. There are people that are great at getting tangled up and remaining emotionally poised. One thing I've learned about trying to learn how to do God's will, it's the same as with service. Try everything, but you don't have to keep trying everything forever. Once you've tried everything, find what you're good at and do that. I found that a super helpful piece of advice I got from someone. And by the way, everything I say, I haven't made any of this up. I've got it from someone else. So feel free to pass it on and pass it off as your own. None of it belongs to me. None of it originates with me. What else? So other outside topics. I've mentioned medication, and medication is a big topic in the world of recovery. Is it outside? Well, it when almost everyone you know who has relapsed and died after many years of sobriety, when in every single case it started with pain medication, well, maybe this is something that we need to discuss. So maybe that's an inside issue, but it's an issue which straddles the inside and the outside. There's an inside aspect to it, there's an outside aspect to it. Just a little story. This is not super relevant, but it's kind of fun. So I was at a I was at a dinner party many years ago where it was with a family and there was some friends there. There was the big table with the grown-ups and there was the little table with the kids, and the kids were like 4, 6, and 8, and there was a baby. So the kids 4, 6, and 8, and the kids were super intelligent. The kids are all grown up now, and whatever, but super intelligent kids. And when we got there, one of them was crying, and we said why, and the mother said, oh, it's because we won't let him have liquid nitrogen for Christmas because he wants to do an experiment with liquid nitrogen, and we won't let him. That was like the 6-year-old or something. So that's what's going on. And there was a lull in the conversation, and we were overhearing what the kids were talking about, and they'd done this arrangement with the crockery and the cutlery, and we said, Harry and Tommy, the older ones, what are you doing there? They said, oh, we're explaining to Charlie, using the plates and the cutlery, Charlie was the 4-year-old, how Russia can be part of Europe and Asia at the same time. So this was the kids' conversation, 4, 6, and 8. Um, Now, the thing about the inside-outside thing, some things are clearly outside, so uh, building dams on the River Volta is clearly an outside issue. What are we going to talk about at my home group this week is clearly an inside issue. Where it gets tricky is the questions where there is an inside aspect and an outside aspect. And those are medicine, psychotherapy, treatment for alcoholism, and meditation even. I'll come to that in a minute. So I think the general rule I follow is to share experience and a little bit of sometimes in apologies to any Americans who are here today or listening in the future. But sometimes my experience, I've heard this a lot on tapes. Now, most tapes are done by Americans. This may be a universal thing. This may not be an American thing. But it's something I've heard a lot on tapes from America, but I never hear in the UK at meetings. So this appears to be a cultural difference. People saying, anyone can have an opinion. All I've got is my story. All I've got is my experience. And opinions, it's a dirty word. If you have an opinion, you're not supposed to have opinions. The thing is, what is my story but my opinion on what happened? If you asked my family, my friends, my co-workers, boy, would you get a different story. So I'm afraid there's a huge amount of subjectivity in how I construe what has happened to me. Very selective. When you hear people's chair, they speak for half an hour. That's half an hour of selected material out of 50 years of existence. It's not fact in the same way as listing the elements of the periodic table. It's a different type of truth. And it talks in the big book as well about God gave us brains to use. He also said, Bill also says, that we are intelligent agents of God. Concept 3 talks about right of decision, this ability to assess a situation and come to our own conclusions, to be informed by others, but to come to our own conclusions. And so, is there anything wrong with opinion? I don't think so. If it's based on reason and principle and experience and, is mutable, it's subject to change and adjustment over time. And I think I try and seek a balance with these issues which straddle the outside and the inside. Psychotherapy, medicine. I'll give you an example of why this is so relevant. And it's not, I don't think it's right to simply just, wash your hands of certain aspects because there is an outside element to them. I know someone in recovery is not the only person. It's a very common situation. Shopping round to different doctors for medication. Shopping round to different psychiatrists, telling the psychiatrists only a very small amount of what is going on, paying for private psychiatrists who don't have access to the medical records. If you're trying to help someone who's doing that, I don't think it serves the person well to go to either extreme and either tell them what to do, which is one extreme. You're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're not going to do this, you're not going to do that. I won't do that. But I don't think it serves them to say medication, outside issue, psychotherapy, outside issue. It's not as black and white as that. So I'm very careful with sponsees if we're straying into, and with psychotherapy, the reason why it's a relevant thing. I've had some amazing psychotherapy, which is super helpful and got me out of the most terrible scrapes. But I've seen I've seen situations and I've experienced situations where it actively counteracted what I was being told in AA. And there were times when I had to stop doing psychotherapy because I was going crazier with it, getting more and more upset, more and more unstable, getting fixated on the past, getting fixated on blame, of looking for external reasons for why I felt how I felt rather than keeping it in the day and looking after basic things. There are other times I might have drunk if I hadn't gone to psychotherapy. So it's not straightforward. What I do with people is I share my experience. If I'm going to share an opinion, I'll say it's just an opinion. But, and this is the important thing, if I'm going to stray into one of these topics, which has got an inside element and an outside element, I'll say, but the decision lies with you. Even if I'm sober 25, 26, 27 years and I've got a sponsee that's 3 weeks sober, I'm not in a position of authority over them. What you do, you are responsible for. You have to live with the consequences of it. So you have to take the decision. I'm just a voice. Talk to your doctor, talk to your psychiatrist, talk to your therapist, talk to your friends, talk to other old timers. I'm just a voice that can give you some ideas. What you do with those ideas is up to you. I have no authority, so that I can share experience without it becoming authoritative in any way, and to make sure that the person remains responsible for what they do with it. Because the most awful things happen in AA when people tell people to stop taking medication, or tell people to stop seeing a psychiatrist, or whatever. Or equally, tell people to start taking medication. I stay out of that, AA stays out of that. But some experience can be shared. And the pamphlet on medication is a great example. It's worth a read once every couple of years, because it does exactly what I've been talking about. I hope I've expressed it correctly, or as I intend to. Uh, it expresses no opinion on the outside issue, but in any sort of grand way. But it does convey its experiences, and then extrapolates from those experiences a little bit, but it's stopped short of legislating on what people should do with these outside matters. And it's great because it means that we're discharging our duty towards people who have genuine and legitimate and important questions about these borderline issues. Are they inside? Are they outside? We're doing our duty to help them without um, uh, uh, without legislating for them. So what else is relevant with so with tradition 10 uh, and outside organizations, uh, the service structure of AA is pretty good, um, about not expressing opinions on outside matters. Where it becomes a real day-to-day relevant topic, in my experience, is when you're doing public information work and you're talking to doctors, you're talking to psychiatrists, you're talking to public health experts, you're talking to charities, you're talking to all sorts of people. And I've unfortunately had the experience where someone is brought in to do an AA talk and they start dissing their own former or present doctors, psychiatrists, psychotherapists to a room full of doctors, psychotherapists, and psychologists. This doesn't, and your head is in your hands. There's nothing you can do you can't stop it at this point. You just have to let it run its course and hopefully do some damage limitation in the question and answer session. So to be immense, there's a line in the big book that we never belittle a good doctor. And it also says we never gave our psychotherapists a chance because we didn't tell them the full story. So a good doctor, to be a good doctor, has got to have full information. Again, this is not a black and white issue, but back to the point. is to be very careful if you're arranging public information events to make sure that the speakers that you bring in are fully versed on what to keep their big fat mouths shut on. In order to cooperate effectively with outside agencies, we've got to be seen to be neutral. If we attack in any way, we're going to get attacked back. Because even if you're right, it doesn't matter. People don't like being criticized or judged or, challenged in any way. So to be super neutral and just stick to what we're good at, which is simply to tell our stories and extrapolate some general points about, and that's what an opinion can be. It's extrapolated from experience. It's not plucked out of the air. It's extrapolated from experience. But also it doesn't do me any good when I get out of my lane in a public information context, where it's very difficult. What will happen? You do a wonderful public information session. There are 30, 40, 50 professionals there. And then the question and answer session starts. And people will ask questions about what are the success rates of AA vis-a-vis other forms of treatment. There are lots of questions can come in which can invite you as the AA speaker to start to stray out of your lane. It's important then to bring it back to experience again and again and again. And actually that topic of how successful is AA is a terribly controversial one, because and the reason it's a borderline issue. It looks like it would be an internal issue, but it's not, because of clinicians who are making decisions about where to refer people, where to send them, what to do with their patients. People who are policymakers, people in public health who are deciding whether to fund treatment centres, whether to fund CBT for people with addiction, whether to fund facilitation of 12-step recovery. That's a big thing in this country, facilitation. So they don't offer 12-step recovery, but they facilitate people's access to it. So it's actually how successful is AA is actually partly an outside issue. And just a couple of tips on how I've dealt with that question. What doesn't help, I don't think, is trying to quote the statistic, which doesn't have any very firm foundation, from one of the forwards. I think it's forward to the second edition, where about 50% got sober straight away, 25% got sober after some relapses, the other 25% improved somewhat, or something like that, because it's qualified by this completely vague qualification condition of those who really tried. Well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. That's not a helpful one. You say that to a clinician and you just look ridiculous. I'm sorry, but within AA, it's a lovely story. But outside AA, unless you can say what really tried means, you've just invalidated the statistic that you brought. It's not referenced. It's not clearly referenced anywhere. People have tried to post-rationalize where that one came from. Like I think the records in Cleveland AA, I think it's roughly from there. Although they kept there are different sets of records kept in early AA with different percentages, so it's not like it was that percentage across the whole fellowship. That doesn't help. What doesn't help either is when someone says, "Well, it's been 100% successful for me." That doesn't help the clinicians either. What does help, and this is a conversation I've had on lots of occasions, and doctors love this. When you have I work part of my job involves working in the area of clinical trials. So I know a little bit about clinical trials. So this is not, I'm not pulling this from my sleeve entirely. When you've got a clinical trial and you're looking at the efficacy of a particular treatment regimen, whether it's medication, this is for any medical condition, it's very clear what the treatment consists of. This dose of this drug at this interval over this period. And you've got a very, very clear population. And you can test compliance as well. If people have to go to the study site to actually take the medication, you can be sure there's a record they've had the injection. The trouble is with statistics and AA. When you dig into the clinical studies about, or the other studies on alcohol treatment, and it comes up with the conclusion about the efficacy of AA. You look in the small print of the study design, and they'll say something like, the study population might be people who have attended at least 2 AA meetings for 6 months. And then the efficacy of AA is judged based on whether or not they've done that. And my experience is that just attending AA meetings does not mean I was trying AA. It's like, I was in the foyer of the cinema twice a week for 6 months. Doesn't mean I saw any of the films. Now, because of the way these studies are designed, it's very, very difficult to design a study which includes as its study population people who've worked the steps with a big book sponsor. It's just, you can't, almost impossible. I can totally get why they design the studies in these ways. And study designs vary hugely when it comes to alcoholism. So the conversation I have with doctors when this comes up, this partly internal question, this partly external question, is to say that to explain what AA looks like from the inside. In London, there are 1,000 groups meeting every week. In some of those, everyone is doing the 12 steps of recovery with a sponsor, is doing lots of service, is doing prayer and meditation. At others, people are just tipping up. And you're going to get different results from those different approaches. The fact that AA is not a homogenous organization, there is massive variation between Group A and Group B. This is new information to doctors. And it explains why most doctors have had some patients who've gone to AA and think it's amazing, and patients who've gone to AA, nothing's happened. And I've heard doctors say that now I get what's going on with my patients, why with some people it works, some people it doesn't. Now I have the information to tell them, when you go to AA, shop around, find the groups which do X, Y, and Z, maybe you'll have a better chance there. So rather than getting involved in the question, you look at the premises under the question and help people to answer those. So without getting too technical about success rates, which doesn't help, you let the Cochrane analysis deal with those. It's one of those. The Cochrane analyses are analyses of when you take lots of studies and you do an analysis over all of how effective a particular treatment is, or different treatments for an illness. You let the statisticians deal with that. You give people information about AA so that they can read those studies in a more informed way. That's my job there. Rather than getting involved in the outside issue, I enable people to examine the outside issue more effectively based on inside information. That's my role there. Other connections between tradition 10 and other traditions. When I'm at fellowship and people start talking about controversial stuff, I feel separate instantly. And if I feel that, probably other people feel that too. And to me, the single thing which makes AA successful is the sense of unity, the sense there is nothing to separate me from you. Tradition 4, keeping our nose out of other people's business, is totally connected with tradition 10. Parallel with step 10, we have ceased fighting anything or anyone. Step 11, we are no longer running the show, thy will be done, just sticking to the next right thought or action. And also there's an element of concept 12, warranty 5. A friend of mine, whenever I start talking about the concepts and warranties, he says, "Oh, you and your warranties, you're always talking about the warranties." Concept 12, warranty 5, no public controversy. And if you're attacked, keep your mouth shut. If there is a back channel to correct misinformation, use the back channel to correct misinformation, but keep your mouth shut. I've got some examples. There are various websites, I'm not going to say what they are, where people take it upon themselves to anonymously report the misbehavior of certain AA groups which are considered cult-like in their behavior. So these websites exist in America, they exist in the UK, maybe they exist in other places. And when a group gets wind of the fact that it's been listed or discussed on one of these, this buzz goes, what are we going to do about it? What you do about it is nothing. What they think about us is none of our business. We take our own inventory. Are we doing anything naughty? If we are, stop it. But complete silence, no. And I've seen the most awful problems arise when people start to get involved with these websites to try to get them to take down their material. Just leave them to it. What else? I've already mentioned this to a certain extent. In the 12 and 12, it says the 10th tradition does not mean that the members of Alcoholics Anonymous, now restored as citizens of the world, are going to back away from their individual responsibilities to act as they see as right upon issues of our time. And Bill talks about not retreating from the social life of the world just because we don't drink. But I wanted to mention this because it's an important principle, that it doesn't mean that I remain in sublime indifference to what goes on around me or what goes on in the world, but there are ways of engaging with it. And I've covered that already. I don't know about you, but I have a tendency to get entangled emotionally and make problems worse through my involvement. So I've got to be very careful in how I involve myself with outside issues. I can see at least one person identifying. And so you've got the direct involvement and the non-direct involvement, which I talked about earlier. I can either become an activist myself in outside issues, or I can, pay other people, fund other people, support other people in doing that. But if I'm going to get involved in an outside issue, and sometimes there are matters in which I do need to get involved in my family, in my community, and society. And here are some things I've been taught. So that the primary principle is cease fighting anything or anyone, but it doesn't mean you can't stand for something. So you work towards something, not fight. You work towards a solution rather than fighting against the problem. It's a whole different mindset that I try and adopt. And I have to, something that Jim W. says is that, and it's in Chuck Chamberlain as well. And it's said in the context of sponsees, that to be helpful to sponsees, you mustn't get emotionally involved in their issues. Don't take their side, but don't take against them either. As soon as you're emotionally involved, you've lost the battle. You're now part of the problem. And I'm going to use a phrase from the outside world, the Karpman drama triangle. Now, I'm not a technician of transactional analysis. I know but a little, but I found this a helpful model to recognize that I get super entangled when shit is going down around me. And there are three roles in the Karpman drama triangle: the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer. And what makes it so interesting is that it's dynamic. You shift roles. So, as when I start to become the victim, I start to blame and become a perpetrator against other people. If someone else is the victim, I tend to try and rescue them and then attack the perpetrator for attacking the victim. And that's how I rescue the victim, is by attacking the perpetrator. And in doing so, I become a perpetrator myself. And then the perpetrator reacts back and I become a victim. And you can play this game for decades. Societies, I'm told, have played this game for centuries. So if I'm going to get involved in stuff, and sometimes in service this is totally relevant. I hear that in Australia you've got a couple of hot topics in the realm of service, is to remain emotionally detached from the question, so that I don't, and to watch for stepping into the roles of victim, persecutor, and rescuer. And instead to ask, does it need to be said? Does it need to be said right now? Does it need to be said by me? Working towards the common welfare rather than dividing people into the different camps of the good people and the bad people. There's a great other principle for getting involved in controversial issues, and it's from the step 4 in the big book: fact finding and fact facing. So to always come back to what the facts are of the situation, to strip out my emotional reaction. Second column of the resentment inventory. What was a good example recently? My friend Ivana, I know she won't mind me saying this, we laugh about it the whole time. I think I've mentioned it before. Second column of the resentment inventory, she wrote, "Oh, Susan, she's always putting me down." Now that sounds like a reasonable thing to put in your second column of your resentment inventory. I dug a little bit. I discovered Susan was like a senior director in the organization she worked for. And in work meetings, Susan, not always, maybe once a week, once a fortnight, would disagree with what my friend Ivana said. And so the second column got changed to: a senior director sometimes disagrees with a point of view I have expressed in a work meeting. Totally different than Susan is always putting me down. Fact finding and fact facing. So in controversial discussions, to bring it back to the facts and to bring it back to what's the primary purpose? Why are we even here? Tradition 5, and unity. And I've mentioned this before. My friend Stefan, who is the chair of London Region North, said his primary job as the chair of London Region North was to keep the peace, to keep everyone unified. As soon as the room divides into different camps, nothing can be achieved. When there is error, and this is a principle from A Course in Miracles. Don't shoot me for mentioning A Course in Miracles. I've already done it, so it's too late. Course in Miracles. This idea that there is no such thing as sin. Outside issue, I know. There is only error, and error calls for correction, sin calls for punishment. So in heated environments, in controversial domains, you get to correct error, but you don't get to hit people over the head and punish them for sin. If you look in the world, from my perspective, there's a lot of people trying to punish each other for what they see as sin. Not so much neutral error correction. More moral loading of errors with this superstructure of sin. I mean, not just in a religious sense. I think it happens in lots of parts of society. Outside opinion, sorry. And personal responsibility, not collective responsibility. So, one way I stick to the facts is by saying what have I done? What's my contribution to the situation, and avoiding generalizations. And when I do that, I tend to be a more constructive contributor to discussions. I was not a constructive contributor to discussions when I got to AA. This question about taking stands as well, and it's important to stand for things on occasion. The principle I've been taught is this: your reaction is your business. If I'm freed of worrying about it, that means I can say what needs to be said, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's unpopular. And the principle, which comes from Dennis F., if you're going to disagree, disagree without being disagreeable. It's a wonderful little phrase, disagree without being disagreeable. I'm working on that one, just so you know. What else? And also this basis for neutrality. So in step 10, it talks about adopting a neutral position. In tradition 10, I'm looking for neutrality as well. And the reason I'm able to be neutral is I'm an intelligent agent. I'm not the principal. The business is God's business. I'm given a job to do. And so there's a big difference. Let's say at a region meeting, in your case, it would be an area meeting. When you notice that something has, that concept is being breached. I was in a situation a while ago where it was suggested that conference delegates, they don't really need to know the concepts or the manuals. They can learn it on the job. So you don't have to know in advance anything about the service. Just turn up. You'll be fine. Now, there are ways of addressing this. And I think that someone in the meeting addressed it beautifully. They found the relevant page of the service manual and simply neutrally read out the passage which suggests that the conference delegates should indeed be fully versed in the concepts, the manuals, AA Comes of Age, the other books, the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. And they were able to do that neutrally because they had no skin in the game. So they didn't bash anyone over the head. They didn't punish anyone. They just read it out and then they shut up. They didn't even comment. They just read it out. Nothing else needed. It was beautiful. I learned a lot from watching that happen. In my life, I've got a couple of things to say about this, question about applying tradition 10 in my life. I think it's closely connected to tradition 4. So the model I use with tradition 4 in let's say relationships is that I have my own private domain, you have your private domain, we have a common domain. The common domain, that's the area where we get to decide what we do together, and we adopt the principles of discussion, vote, and substantial unanimity. That's warranty 4 of concept 12. And step 11, this idea of the group conscience. But I have my private domain, you have your private domain. There's a rabbi called Rabbi Manis Friedman, M-A-N-I-S, new word, Friedman, F-R-I-E-D-M-A-N, who is brilliant on many things. Lots of his stuff will be of interest if you're Jewish, and in particular Haredi. It will be fascinating. If you're not, it won't be. But lots of his stuff is of absolutely general application, particularly the relationship stuff and how to have a relationship with God. He's brilliant on, in my opinion. One of the things he says about relationships is the principle of modesty. And by modesty, I don't mean, and he doesn't mean, you know, what does it say in the Just for Today card? We dress becomingly. Some groups suggest that women should wear skirts because this is what constitutes becomingly. This is not what we do at my home group. But anyway, I digress. At my home group, you can wear whatever you want as long as we can't see what you've had for breakfast. That's just the only principle that we follow. But so modesty, what does modesty mean? Modesty means if you have a character defect, I look the other way and I allow you to have it without shaming you for it. Oh my God, you mean I don't get to say anything? Now, when something affects common welfare, maybe there is a time when we talk about being on time to catch the train. But if it's your private domain, to allow you to have to work stuff out or not work stuff out, it's fine. And to have no opinion on that. Um, the slogans for Tradition 10, um, Tom W. talks about don't go around the neighborhood yanking weeds out of other people's yards. Start with your own yard and end with your own yard. The phrase he uses also is tend your own acre. Another two ones which I think are beautiful. Keep my wind out of other people's sails. Stop being the motor, stop trying to be the driving force in other people's lives, but also keep keep my sails out of other people's wind. So don't let myself be blown around by other people. And Tradition 10 is about creating this inner zone where I'm totally reliant on God without being, I think a lot of my Al-Anon stuff is to do with entanglement with other people. I'm not responsible for me, but I am responsible for you. You are not responsible for you, but you are responsible for me. Entanglement. And keeping my wind out of your sails and keeping my sails out of your wind is there's lots of detail, but that's the basic solution to that. Dennis F., lovely quotation here. He says, without nightly written inventory, I become involved with the wrongs of the world that I think keep me from being happy. Dwelling on the defects of others prevents me from seeing my own and having to change. He wrote this in 1982. Becoming involved with the wrongs of the world that I think keep me from being happy. If I had £1 for every time someone over the last 6 months has said, oh, the way things are in the world at the moment, the way the world is going, look at the world is terrible, oh, the world. And I can do that too. If I had £1 for every time I've thought that, I'd be a rich man indeed. If ifs and buts were candy and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas, as Jim Willis says. So a couple more points if you'll indulge me. In sponsorship, it's only my business if you make it my business. So implicit in the sponsorship relationship is spiritual consent. If there's any doubt, I explicitly ask for it and say, hey, would you like my input on that? And if they say no, say, okay then. Because if there isn't consent, it won't be heard anyway. And I'll tell you a quick story about a sponsee many years ago, who would tell me terrible things that were happening, and I would launch in and give my sponsorial input, which he would argue with. I started to stay completely silent and just wait until he said, what do you think about that? The first time he did that, and I told him, he didn't argue because he had asked for it. So I stopped playing the game. I won't get into the game, there isn't time, but there is a game there. I stopped playing the game. I adopted this principle of I won't have an opinion on it unless you give me the entitlement to have the opinion on it. Then we could have a discussion. It totally changed the relationship. Practical example in the home. I have my cupboards, shelves, and surfaces. He has his cupboards, shelves, and surfaces. We have common cupboards, shelves, and surfaces. His cupboards, shelves, and surfaces are none of my business. I don't manage that all the time. I'm a really bad person. But that's the principle I try and follow. And we have very different attitudes to cupboards, shelves, and For me, I like to have almost nothing, and if I have it, I like it to be alphabetical or color coded. My other half has a different approach. No one is right, no one is wrong. Um, and the last thing, about time. So what he does with his time is his business. What I do with my time is my business, except where it affects him. So tradition 4, tradition 10 are very closely aligned. So I ask his permission if I'm going to go on trips, if I'm going to be away in the evenings, if I'm going to do anything which inconveniences him, I ask him. If we're in the kitchen together and my phone rings, I ask, is it okay if I take this call now? I don't just take the call. Um, and so this principle of um, tradition 10 works both ways. So what do other people get to have an opinion on in my life? If my life is affecting them, they get to have an opinion on it. It's fine. They're allowed to ask the question. They're allowed to make the request. That's kind of all I've got time for. Let's see. I don't think there are any questions, are there, Gabrielle? There's a book. Let me just find the title. Um, and it's available as an audio book. And he's a good person to. He's very pleasant to listen to. Um, just give me a second. Doesn't doesn't anyone blush anymore? And it's written by an ultra-Orthodox rabbi. I gave it to a friend of mine who's like totally gangster, and it transformed his relationship. It was such an extraordinary combination of cultures. It's amazing. It's amazing. I found it very, very helpful. Anything else, Gabrielle? Okay, good. Well, I'm going to stop the recording there, if I may, and